Hello, all my lovelies, and welcome to a new episode of the Mommy Vibe. I'm your host, Kiera, who is now a mother of 4. Now, normally I would open with my line of gathering around for chat while having a comfort beverage of some kind, but I want to start this podcast off with a warning. We're going to talk about some really hard topics today. Right off the gate, we're going to be talking about some really scary stuff, some really traumatic stuff. And if you are an expecting mother who doesn't really need to hear worse scenarios right now, I suggest maybe coming back to this after the baby's born, after everything hopefully goes well, because I don't want to scare you. And maybe to all you mothers out there who may have just had a baby and it didn't go quite as planned, and you're struggling, but you're not ready to talk about it yet, and this might be a little much for you, or it could maybe put you back into that room that you don't want to be in right now. It's okay. If you're not ready, you're not ready. But there are some great resources to help you through this kind of stuff, and I will talk about that later. I'll probably have some resources somewhere for you guys. But this is not a discussion for the faint of heart. And I want to preference that first. And the reason why I think this is so important to talk about is because what happened was really scary, really awful. And some people may need to hear it so they don't feel alone. Some people may need to hear it so they can advocate better for themselves. I don't know. But I know some people need to hear this. Why don't we start at the end of my pregnancy? The end of my pregnancy was really hard. I could not stand for more than 5 minutes. I was having a low migraine no matter what I did. My blood pressure always seemed fine when it got checked by the doctors and whatnot, but given everything, my vision going in and out of being blurry and not blurry to the point where I was getting super dizzy just standing up, and the doctors told me I couldn't drive anymore because they were worried about me crashing on the road. So they had to do a 24-hour urine collection. I hate that. If you don't know, there's a thing in pregnancy called preeclampsia. And when they suspect you of having preeclampsia, they make you do a 24-hour urine collection because they're trying to look at protein levels in your urine. Because if you have high protein levels in your urine, then it's a big indicator that it is affecting your kidneys and liver, which is not good news. And preeclampsia can be fatal. Preeclampsia turns into eclampsia. It can be a fatal thing. And the only way to solve the issue is delivering the baby. So preference that. So I actually did have to do a 24-hour collection, and everything seemed elevated that shouldn't be elevated. And I was anemic now at this point. So I was not in good standings, but it wasn't high enough at first. They weren't exactly concerned until the next Monday after we got the test results back that I went in and they checked my blood pressure, and it was through the roof to the point that they sent me to the hospital. The first 1 or 2 blood checks for my blood pressure was still high, but they had me laying down, and so it went down. So they sent me home with mild preeclamptic symptoms. But then the next day, I actually had an appointment with the high-risk pregnancy center because this being my 4th child and having previous preeclampsia and some of the things showed up in my blood tests from early on in the pregnancy, they've been having me go to the high-risk pregnancy center as well. And sitting up, they're checking my blood pressure, and it's high again. And it seems that if I'm sitting or standing, my blood pressure is skyrocketing. And as long as I'm laying down and I'm calm, my blood pressure is okay. But they looked at the urine sample from the 24-hour collection, and then within the week, the urine collection that they had me do at the hospital the day before, and my protein had climbed. It was higher. And so the doctor, I was only 36 weeks. I want to preference 36 weeks is not full term. It's not a term. It is premature. But because they were so worried of all the symptoms that I was having, my high-risk doctor wanted to have me go in and be induced that day. I was excited. I was not scared, though. I was like, he's measuring big on the ultrasound. He's fine. Everything's going to be fine. You know, he's measuring 6 pounds, 4 ounces, which is like a decent weight. Both of my oldest two were in the 6-pound range and whatnot. So like, I didn't think anything of it. And they were born at 37 weeks and he's measuring big. And I didn't even trust the ultrasound because my youngest daughter, she was measuring like below like average size wise. And she was born 9 pounds, 9 ounces. So like, I had a feeling he was bigger and whatnot. So I was ready. I felt awful and I was ready to have a baby. So after scrambling, getting everything nice and organized, because, you know, we were kind of planning at that 37-week mark. So this was a week earlier than we thought. Okay, fine. You know, we get everything, get to the hospital, get checked in. You know, they have to put the IV in my arm. Fun fact, I have very, 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 very bad veins. I'm the worst stick. If you are a nurse, if I walked into your clinic to get a blood draw, it's a bad day because it's not fun for me. It's not fun for you. Bad veins. They roll, they jump, they disappear, they just blow. Not good. So it was tricky getting that first IV in, but they got one in. 10 minutes later, the machine stopped like malfunctioning that was monitoring the baby. So we had to move rooms. That was fun in the most chaotic sense. And because I was 36 weeks, usually when I got induced, they just start me like straight on Pitocin because I had already like started a little bit progression, but I hadn't started labor like at all at 36 weeks and whatnot. And so they had to like start with like softening up the cervix, which was fun because I actually got to feel like actual like real contractions made by my body and not made by Pitocin. So they weren't too bad, but they hurt for sure. Not as bad as Pitocin though. But for some reason, my labor was progressing super slow. Also, they get me in, right? And they have to draw blood in this new room. And immediately the vein that this lady takes, the nurse or whatever, takes the blood from, immediately blows. So now I have a huge bruise on my hand. Yeah, they had to take it from my hand because everywhere else just wasn't working. Vein finders don't work, nothing. All right. Lucky they got the first IV in without any help. So, you know, I'm going throughout the night. His head isn't engaging at all, which is really, really weird. And every time that they measured how dilated it was, they kept saying this, like, it's weirdly thicker on the inside. Okay, I'm going to reference that later. That's actually a really important comment. So, you know, I finally get dilated enough that they could put Pitocin in. But right as they get ready to put the Pitocin in, the IV vein blows. And to them, it didn't feel puffy or swollen, but my whole hand felt swollen. And it hurt so bad if they tried to even flush it with the saline, which shouldn't happen. So they take that out. And then they had to keep trying to find a vein. Again, vein finders don't work. Bad sticks all around. I got stuck a good 8 times. I was stuck with the IV earlier. They took my blood from another spot earlier. And then they had to try 2 more times to try to get an IV in. Failed both times. Huge bruises. Then they got the anesthesiologist to try and get a new IV in. Stuck 2 times. Failed. So by that time, I had bruises up and down my arm. I'd already been stuck like 8 different times that day, not to mention the times before like Monday when I had to get stuck at the hospital again. So they eventually had to bring in an actual ultrasound machine to give me a new IV because my veins are that bad. Oh gosh, it was awful. I mean, the one with the ultrasound was like the least painful one though, to be honest. But yeah, up and down my arms, bruising. It was not fun. And then they eventually were able to put the Pitocin in, and it's great, except it hurts so much more because then everything gets kicked into high gear. And so then I had to wait for the freaking epidural. And the anesthesiologist was all of a sudden not available, so I had to wait like a couple more hours. It was agonizing. And like, I seemed to, I'd been stuck at like 5 centimeters dilated after the Pitocin. So the doctor says, go ahead, let's go break her water. Apparently my water sac was actually bulging out of my cervix. So that's fun. So the first attempt, the doctor, you know, fails. And again, they're feeling the cervix. He's not engaging for some reason. The water sac's bulging out. It's weirdly thick on the inside, but it's stretchy and whatnot, but it doesn't feel normal, but they're not worried about it, which they should have been, honestly. Again, I'll preference this for later down the road. So the second attempt, after like an hour of letting me like rest, and then they come back and they go to attempt to break my water again, and they successfully break my water. But that is when everything went wrong. Before I get into this next part, I want to preference this is a major trauma. So if you aren't prepared to listen to something traumatic, I suggest that you come back later, maybe skip further ahead, but this part is hard to talk about and it needs to be shared because it's real. But I want to make sure you guys understand this is a lot and it's going to give you feelings is the best way I can describe it. So they break my water the second time and instantly the atmosphere in the room shifted. The doctor wasn't leaving. And this wasn't my OBGYN. This was one of the doctors at the hospital. She was still there. And she says something to the nurse. And she's not talking to me. No, she's talking to the nurse. And I'm trying to understand what she's trying to say. And she's telling the nurse, we have to call them. We have to go. We have to go now. Those are not words you want to hear. We have to go now. And then she says the cord came out first. See, the reason why she had stayed is because she was trying to get the cord back in over my son's head, but my son had instantly engaged after my water broke. And the cord had come out with the water. And that is what's called a cord prolapse. And the reason why that is such a scary and bad thing is that if the cord comes out first while you're having contractions and the baby's going through the canal, it can compress the cord and they could lose oxygen, suffer severe brain damage because of the lack of oxygen going to their brains. At that point, the doctor had to keep my son from pressing down on the cord because they couldn't get the cord back in. And my first thought, I was only 5 centimeters dilated. They can't deliver me like that. No, wait, the cord came out. They can't deliver me, period, because the cord came out first. And anyone who knows me, anyone who talked to me during my pregnancies knows I have been terrified about getting a C-section. The idea of being awake and being cut into was terrifying to me. And it has always been terrifying to me. And here was the point. My nightmare came true. There was nothing I could do as a swarm of doctors and nurses rushed into my room. And my husband was asleep, so I had to wake him up and I called for him. And of course, when you're waking out of sleep, you're really groggy. Don't get mad at my husband for sleeping. I tell him to sleep. That was my decision for him to do that, to rest. I love my husband very much. And I had to utter the words, I have to do C-section. And it was at that moment, having to say it out loud, I was terrified. I was scared. And all I could think about was that I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want it to be real. I wanted it to wake up and not be here in that position. And then they start moving the bed. They have to rush down. There's someone on top of me because they have to keep my son's head from crushing the cord. And as they move me into the hallway, I close my eyes as tight as it can go. There's all these noises. Someone tells somebody that they need to get my husband dressed. And all the while, I'm screaming in my head, I don't want to do this. It's terrifying. And a doctor next to me asked me how I'm hanging in there. And I go, I'm scared. And she goes, I know, honey. And at this point, I can't even open my eyes. I'm so scared. My arms are so close to my chest because I know that they're going to have to tie me down at the table. I was just holding my arms over my chest in like an X because I just didn't want it to be real. And we get into the operation room. And I know we're in there because I can tell even with my eyes closed that it's brighter in that room. And they're talking about how they want to do this and they have to switch me over. And it isn't until they switch me over into the operating bed that it hits me that I can't get out of this, that it's happening, that they're going to cut me open while I'm wide awake. They were talking about needing a curtain, not having enough time for a certain type of curtain. And I remember opening my eyes at one point and the room was white, this uncomfortable white. All right. Now, I am LDS, so we go to our temples and inside is white, very white, and in gold. This was a different white. It was not a good feeling white, like in the beauty of the temples and how white those are. No, this is a scary white, like I'm going to die white. And then they bring in the arm restraints and they click it into place. And I have to give them my arms to tie down. I couldn't run away. My son's life was in jeopardy. Of course, I had to do this. I had to do this for him, but I was terrified. So they're strapping my arms down. And all of a sudden, I feel pinching along my lower belly in a line. Not just like someone grabbing numb skin. I can feel pinching. I know that she's pinching between her fingers. And I open my eyes and I look and try to catch any doctor's attentions. And I go, I can feel her pinching me. And they go, no, it's just pressure. It's just pressure. And again, I go, no, it's not pressure. I can feel the pain of her pinching me. And I'm looking terrified, screaming. I can feel the pain. I can feel her pinching me. And they're trying to tell me it's just pressure. I think that was the most scariest thing of my life because at that point, nobody was listening to me. I was in a room filled with strangers, tied to a table, screaming that I could feel the pain to people who were about to cut into me. And they weren't listening. In fact, it was worse. They were trying to gaslight me and telling me that I didn't feel what I felt. And I already did not like I don't like doctors. Anyone knows me. I get very anxious around doctors. Don't trust them. Don't ask me why. I don't. I have a white coat anxiety or something like that, I guess. But doctors make me uncomfortable. And so here, having that validated of doctors not listening to me while I'm screaming at them, I can feel the pain of her pinching me was absolutely terrifying. And I could feel how panicked I felt. I remember just looking, trying to get anyone to listen to me if I can feel her pinching. And this is all happening super fast. But in my head, it's every time I remember it, it's slow. Because I know that they have to do things quickly because of the type of emergency that it was. But I would have much preferred the doctors to go, I know, I'm sorry, you can feel it. I'm sorry, but we have to. We don't have time. We're going to try to do something, but I'm sorry, we can't wait. If they would have told me that or something along those lines, okay, at least they're not invalidating my feelings or trying to gaslight me. But they just, over and over, it's just pressure. It's just pressure. And then I feel the knife against my skin. I feel it cut into me, and I have never made such a sound in my life. I've never screamed like that ever before. I didn't know I could scream like that. And I do voice acting. I know my voice. And I didn't know I could do that. And that's the scream that haunts me. When I go back, that's what I hear is that scream. And all I can feel is this blinding pain and somebody trying to grab my face because I'm trying desperately to run away because it hurts so bad. See, apparently it turns out that little redhead gene of being resistant to anesthetics, anesthesiology or whatever, doesn't necessarily mean that you're redhead. You could have red in your hair and just not know it. Because apparently I'm resistant to anesthetics. I didn't know this was even a possibility. I always thought that an epidural would just numb up to your hips. Because from my hips down, I couldn't feel anything. But as soon as you passed my hips, I could feel everything. And I could still somewhat move my legs too. So they weren't even like that numb if you think about it. Because apparently you're really not supposed to be able to move your legs at all when you're on an epidural or something. I never knew that. There'd never been a problem before. So it never dawned on to me that, my belly should be numb too. So I literally got to feel them cut into me and rip and pull. And my son, when he cried, I was in so much pain. I couldn't even register that he was crying at first. And when I did, all I felt was sadness because I was so scared. And I hated where I was. I hated feeling like nobody would care if I died on that table. I hated being in a room with strangers being tied down to a table and no one listened to me and cut into me and held me down while I screamed. That was what I was focusing on instead of my son, who I had waited for so long to meet, was born. I couldn't even open my eyes to see him because at that point I didn't want to open my eyes anymore. I was so scared and in so much pain. And then after that, all I saw was a kaleidoscope. I think they had put me under general anesthesia at that point after my son was born because I could no longer feel my body. All I could feel was like this pain, but there was no body to register the pain. It just felt pain. And I couldn't remember my name. I couldn't remember where I was, who I was. I was just staring up into this kaleidoscope of white and red and blue the feeling that you are not alive or a thing or a person is unsettling. When you realize there was a short amount of time where you were conscious, but you could not remember that you were a person, makes me feel very unsettled. That all I could feel was pain and confusion because I couldn't feel a body. I couldn't remember anything. All I could feel and recall is pain. Suddenly, I do hear a man's voice. And at first, I don't recognize the man's voice. And I think I'm dead, that I have to be dead. And that's God's voice. And I'm dead for a good 5 minutes, I think. I sat there, probably a minute, really. I'm probably thinking in extremes here until the kaleidoscope started to change and I could register a cyclops looking thing and registered that was my husband. That was my husband's voice. That was my husband holding my face and trying to talk to me. I still couldn't move my mouth. I couldn't tell if I was even breathing. I could tell my eyes were open at this point because I could see my husband. But I remember just wanting to tell him so desperately that they cut into me. They took my guts out. They're still inside me. Those were some of the first few things I said coming out of whatever they put me on. At this point, I think they had put some type of painkiller into my body. So I wasn't feeling the pain. I could just feel them inside my body. And I was so tired and I was so hungry. My husband told me our son weighed 7 pounds, 4 ounces. At 36 weeks, that's a really big baby. He would have been close to 11 pounds. And I remember the first thing I said was, I told you I didn't trust the ultrasound. During this whole time, I didn't see him. He was born at 2:00 and I didn't get to see him in person until 8 that night. It's 2:00 in the afternoon and I didn't get to see him until 8 that night. A NICU doctor came over. I wasn't listening. She said something about taking our baby. And then she asked my husband if he wanted to go with the baby. And I was terrified. And all I could say is, don't go. Don't leave me. Don't go. My husband, who I love and I know wanted to go with our son, told the doctor, I can't. She needs me. I can't leave her. Because I knew if he left me, I would be in a room where nobody cared. And I couldn't be left alone in that room again. Not without him. When all I wanted was him to hold me, and he couldn't. At least he could be in the room with me. After all this happened, they still had to wheel me back to labor and delivery. I had to get blood. So the first time I got a blood transfusion, that's cool, I guess. I'm able to say that and whatnot. But eventually, I woke up pretty quickly after everything. Normally, it takes people a little bit longer, and they have nausea and stuff like that. I was pretty much, by the time I got back to labor and delivery, I was starving and I needed food, but I sounded so hoarse that the nurse kept thinking I was still groggy because the scream ripped up my vocals. So my throat was super sore. So I was like, I'm not tired yet. My throat hurts. And this very groggy sounding voice, but I was perfectly awake. And all I wanted was chocolate pudding and a soda and Chick-fil-A. But eventually, once they got the blood in, I told my husband to go ahead and go down in the NICU to be with our son, to go see our son. I know that he was wanting to, but he didn't want to go until I told him to go. Because like I said, my husband loves me, and he wanted to make sure that I was okay first. Because our son was with doctors. He would be fine. I'm not fine even with doctors. So I took priority in that moment, I guess. And for an hour, he was with our son in the NICU. And I sat there alone, again, in labor and delivery, not even the nurse. And people are now messaging on the phone, all this stuff, asking for pictures of a baby I hadn't even seen yet, asking for details, wanting questions answered. It felt so overwhelming, but I thought if I didn't focus on trying to answer these things, that I would fall apart. I knew I wasn't okay. I knew for a fact that I was not okay, but I needed to focus on something else right now because I couldn't afford to fall apart. When my husband came back from seeing our son, he brought me a soda, which I downed very quickly. It was a root beer. It was delicious. He told me that our son would have to stay in the NICU, which means I couldn't hold him. I couldn't see him. And that broke my heart because at that point, I just wanted my baby and my husband. And my husband couldn't hold me right then and there because I was just recently cut open, so having someone in the bed with me at that moment in time is not a good idea. And I couldn't even hold my baby because he was in the NICU. his lungs were just a little bit underdeveloped. So even after all of that, I didn't even get to have my baby. I couldn't use the restroom by myself. I couldn't get in and out of the bed without being in excruciating pain. I only got to hold my baby for the first time the next day. I got to see him that night. I made sure of it. I was not going to not see my baby in person the day that he was born. But when I went to see him for the first time, they were going to have to put him on a ventilator to give him medicine to open up his lungs, which scared the crap out of me. And then I just spent every day in the hospital, going over to the NICU as much as I could, crying, pumping every 2 hours, even if I wasn't getting anything other than that first night, because first night I was able to get a lot of colostrum out, which if you don't know, colostrum is what comes before the milk. And this is where I'm very grateful for my faith and why I have the faith that I do. Because when I was 30 weeks pregnant, I was leaking so much colostrum, it was seeping through my shirt if I leaned the wrong way. And originally, I wasn't going to collect any of the colostrum. I didn't see a point of it. But I felt very strongly that I needed to. And I collected about 155 milliliters of colostrum, which, because of that, my son never had to have formula. He was able to have the colostrum up until my milk came in on about the third day. It just ran, the colostrum just ran out when I was able to pump 2 or 3 milliliters of milk. And then, then I got really engorged and I couldn't pump enough milk. I was doing anywhere from 4 to 6 ounces of pumping session every 2 to 3 hours. Was I sleeping? No. Was I looking at my baby the whole time? Yes. Whenever he had feeding times, I would hold him for that 30 minutes and then I would pump afterwards while being there in the NICU room. I was allowed to do that, thankfully, but it was absolutely awful. And I spent many nights not sleeping because every time I closed my eyes, I'd go back to the operating table and hear that scream again. To the point on, I think, the third day that night, I broke down crying. I was in so much pain. I had been stuck 2 more times because they needed to take more blood and it failed because those awful veins. My IV in my arm was hurting and I wanted it out and it probably blew because of how much pain I was in. And I had great nurses, a lovely nurses night and day. They were great. And when they saw the kind of condition I was in, they immediately go, you don't have to do anything you don't want to. If they come in to draw your blood, just tell them no. They're not going to force you. And even an hour before they came in to try and draw my blood again, she reminded me, just tell them no, you don't want your blood drawn. Remember that, okay? Unfortunately, the lady who came in to draw my blood, when I said, no, I don't want to have my blood drawn, goes, well, you have to. And then proceeds to stick me once, and it fails. And I'm now in tears because I'm not only being ignored, I'm back on the table. I am mentally exhausted and drained. And here this lady was ignoring me, sticking me when I'm in so much pain already, failing that stick. And then literally she's putting tourniquets on top of bruises, trying to find a place to go, and she eventually sticks me again in a bruise, gets the blood, which is great. But at that point, I'm just broken into tears. Oh, and because I'm crying, she looks at me while drawing blood and says, don't cry. This lady literally is putting tourniquets over bruises, and I'm in so much pain. She's already stuck me once and is telling me not to cry. And they wonder why I don't trust doctors. Because this is the stuff that I've experienced my whole life. This whole time, the first week and a half that my son is alive, he's in the NICU. And when I eventually do come home, the first night, I was able to get a courtesy room because I couldn't leave my son. But I had to the next day for my kid's sake because I have 3 other kids. And my 2 oldest are asking, where's baby brother? When's baby's brother coming home? And that is so soul-crushing because you want your baby. And now your kids are asking where that baby is. And you have to tell them that he's in the NICU and they can't even see him in person because they're too little to go into the NICU to see the baby. It was a nightmare. Really, honestly, it has been a nightmare. And I am really, really thankful to the support that I had. My mother, my in-laws, everyone was so worried about me. But it was really hard because everybody is waiting for me to fall apart. My husband even is waiting for me to fall apart. And I know that he went through it himself because he was there. And they wouldn't even let him in the room until after my son was born. And I know for a fact that he had to go through his own demons because here he is unable to be there for his wife who is screaming bloody murder in the other room. And he can't be in there until they let him in. And it was taking a toll. No matter how many times I was pressing him, he was so afraid that saying anything would make me spiral because he knew I wasn't okay. But I knew he wasn't okay. But everybody was worried about me. And it was so draining. And it was, no, you sit down, let us do things for you rather than, hey, what do you need to get done today and how can we help you do that thing? Because I don't like people doing chores for me because then I feel really guilty and really bad and it makes me really stressed out. So my advice, if you know someone who is going through something similar, don't sit there and wait for them to fall apart so you could catch them. Just ask them, hey, what do you need to get done today that I can help you with right now? What can I do right now to help you? And then if sometimes they need you to list off things, being like, do the dishes need to get done? Can I do them for you? Do you want help with them? Do you want me to hold the baby while you do it? Do you want me to hold the baby while you take a shower? Like you can list off things of how you can help and different degrees of helping. Because sometimes that's what a mom needs is kind of just you to kind of ask them what they need. Don't go there just to hold the baby so they can do chores unless they ask you to. Don't go there just making them sit down and you do everything because sometimes that really stresses people out. I'm one of those people. I get what you're coming from and I'm so grateful that you love me and whatnot, but that's not helpful because I need distractions. I can't be sitting down and being sad. I need to be productive right now or else I am going to fall apart. I am going to have a mental breakdown. Once my son came home from the NICU, things got a little bit better. I found this wonderful place online that is specific for birth trauma and mothers postpartum, even like during pregnancy. Prospera is its name, Prospera.com. It's founded by mothers and it so far has been so helpful for me. And I would absolutely recommend them if you are struggling with any postpartum whatsoever to check out this company. It's a small business, but my coach, she's been fantastic and been helping me a lot, not even with just like the postpartum and the processing my trauma of my births and all that, but also helping me kind of see patterns that my previous therapist didn't point out to me and helping me go a lot deeper to kind of work on a lot more things that I wasn't realizing before because they work with cognitive therapy. So the cognitive behavior therapy. So there are actually tools and steps that I'm being given to use. And it's been so helpful. And though I am still in the process of healing, I still feel like I have been butchered. I still feel unsettled by the memories, by the birth experience. And I still in a lot of pain. I'm functioning a lot better. I'm able to talk about it a lot better. As you heard today, I'm healing slowly, steadily, but I am okay. Even though, the universe just really hates me right now, I swear. I get my baby home, right? The same week of 4th of July. On July 5th, my dog dies. Wake up and my 2 older kids found our dog passed away in the hallway. And then a couple of weeks later, my gum swells up and I have to take antibiotics because my wisdom tooth is impacted and was causing an infection. And I still have to get that taken care of. And it's been one thing after another. But I'm happy I have my son. I'm happy I have all my kids. I'm happy for school starting back up next week. Oh my gosh. I'm grateful for the love that I have. My mother, my younger sister, my in-laws, all of them. I'm very blessed to have that support. And I know that if this would have happened with any of my other kids, I would have fallen apart and I wouldn't have been okay. But I'm going to be okay. I'm getting back into my writing, into my voice acting. I'm gonna be okay. Again, anyone is struggling out there. There are great places to get help, especially moms recovering from postpartum or anything like that. Prospera.com is a great website to look into to getting that help that you need that works with your schedule. I know that sounds like a commercial. I promise this isn't sponsored. This is just because I feel it's really important to share because I didn't know this place existed either until I looked up stuff specific for birth trauma. And there's always a Discord that you could come and talk to me. If you have an experience that you feel ready to share, absolutely come talk to me about it. You can catch me on Twitter at Twitter handle Kiera eVoice. Or if you want to watch some of my content, though I don't post very often, you can come find me on TikTok at Kiera eVoice. Oh, we also have a Reddit that we could talk about too. I always forget the Reddit. Anyways, hang in there, moms. Don't forget to embrace the chaos, cherish all the memories and moments, and stay perfectly imperfect. This is Kiera, and I hope that this chat helped somebody. And if not, well, we'll see about the next chat. Signing off.